Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Implementation of the IEP and Advocacy, sponsored by Peak Parent Center. My name is Pam Christie. I'm at Peak Parent Center, and I will be monitoring the chat throughout this training. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in this event. You will be muted for most of the presentation, so please use the chat to ask questions, and that is at the bottom. That's what I will be monitoring. And if there's a question that I can't answer, I will be nicely interrupting Anne and asking that on your behalf. Closed captioning is available also at the bottom of your screen. It's my pleasure to introduce Anne. Take it away.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Pam said, my name is Ann Wilson, and I'm on the staff of Peak Parent Center. I'm also a parent of a child with an IEP. If anyone wants to share in the chat anything about themselves, what role you're in, where you might be in the IEP process, what ages you are the parent to or work with, whatever you want to share, just kind of gives us a feel for who's there. This webinar, this is the third of a three-part series, but this is an introductory webinar. So if you're seasoned, you will hopefully find this as review. It might be repetitive. The first part of this was IEP basics, evaluations, and eligibility. And last week we talked about development of the IEP and contents. Both of those, if they're not already on our website, will be there soon. So if you want to look back and see the recordings, those are there. Today, the focus is implementation of the IEP and advocacy. A quick overview. So we'll start with the delivery of services and supports, which happens after your IEP is complete. We'll talk about the responsibilities of various parties. And then we'll talk about progress monitoring, managing conflict, which does come up, and it's almost part of the design of IDEA's process. And then we'll talk about advocacy and family engagement. So as we talked about last week, once you're determined eligible, you'll have that initial IEP, and the IEP team will work together to develop those parts. So you have your needs, present levels and needs, your goals, your supports and services, and all of that designed to result in educational benefit. So once that's written and placement is determined, the district is responsible to deliver those supports and services as soon as possible. There can't be an undue delay, but there are always reasons that might come up while there might be a slight delay. For example, if your IEP is developed over the summer, your services probably won't begin until the school year begins, so you would have that delay. Other times there are circumstances that they just need to get in place. For example, transportation arrangements. Maybe if you have assistive technology, they've got to get the technology. If they don't have it, maybe there has to be some training. So there might be reasons why they can't implement it right away. And so once the IEP is developed, everyone has responsibility. Everyone who's part of the team has responsibilities. And so I'll talk about school district responsibilities. These are district responsibilities, but usually you see most of this happen at the school level. And so the school team is the one who's carrying these things out. But the school district has to follow those procedural requirements. If you remember when we talked about the standard for FAPE, there's procedural and substantive. So the school district needs to make sure they're following all those procedural requirements, including following the timelines, making sure the parents get a copy of the procedural safeguards. And there are times when they have to give those. They have to ensure that the parents are having the opportunity to participate. They need to make sure that all those who are involved with the IEP have the copies. And then they need to make sure those services are being provided and the progress is being monitored. They also, if the student has outside agencies providing transition services, they need to make sure those are being provided. It doesn't mean they're supervising those services, but they need to make sure that's happening. And then the periodic reviews we talked about, you have the annual meeting at least once a year. And then if sometime during the year an adjustment needs to be made, they need to make sure those are made. Then we talk about specifically about the school team, but they all, again, fall under this umbrella of the school district. So if a student's in the general education classroom, the general education and the special education teachers share the responsibility. A lot of times people think it's the special education teacher's responsibility, but it really is a shared responsibility of the students in that classroom. Related and support service providers are also responsible for whatever is defined for them in the IEP. And then all team members are responsible for continuing evaluating the effectiveness of the plan. And so if someone has concerns it's not working, the team needs to come together and work that out. Parents and students also have responsibilities. So if you're a parent, you're responsible for communicating with the school about your child's progress, just as they are responsible to communicating with you about your child's progress. So if you're having concerns that you're not seeing growth in something that they're supposed to be making progress on, talk to your team about it. Don't just wait until the next annual meeting to bring it up. The student also, we want students to be communicating about what's working for them and what's not. Are they getting a meaningful learning experience? So, and that the more you can engage your student in learning how to talk about their experience, the better. So that's just something that we all need later in life. And so the more you practice it, the better that can be. And remember that you can ask for an IEP meeting if your child is not making the progress you think they should be making. So a quick overview of the process. So we've got the IEP, and then during that year before the next annual review, we have that progress monitoring that takes place, and that will give you an idea of how things are working. It's not always, remember, it's not always linear progress. It can be, kind of a jagged road at times, but we want to see that trend. And then you have your annual review, and then every 3 years, you'll have your reevaluation. When we talk about progress monitoring, if you remember, we talked about progress monitoring is a section of the IEP, and it will state in your IEP how it's going to be done and when you will receive the reports. But it's the ongoing process of collecting and analyzing data to determine student progress. And they want to use that data to make instructional and service decisions. It's the responsibility of the IEP team to be doing it. And again, as I just mentioned, so the IEP will say what, who, when and where, and how it will be reported. We are looking at progress toward the goals, and that helps the team to make their instructional decisions. And it helps the team, are we making progress toward the goal we set for this year? And what will we need to do in the next year? And so it's sort of that ongoing process, again, to make sure we're getting that educational benefit. So there's a lot of benefits of this. It helps parents and students know what's expected. What are we looking for at school? As parents, we often want to see growth in many areas, some of them that are beyond the scope of the IEP, but so it lets us know what we're looking at in the school context. It gives the teachers an organized record of the students' performance. And I mentioned last week, they also have, most districts have a form that they're doing these reports, so they'll have that in an organized way. It just helps teachers know what's working and not working based on data, not just on impressions. The progress monitoring reports must be given to parents in an easy to understand way. So if you're a parent and you're looking at this and, I don't know what this means, then ask questions, or say, maybe could we describe this in a different way? I don't know what this means. And again, it gives the team the data they need for making those decisions. So that's sort of the overview of progress monitoring. Something that happens a lot in the IEP process is conflict. One of the ways that the IEP is monitored is through parents looking at the progress, and we actually, it's a little bit set up so parents bring their complaints to the school. So sometimes that does lead to conflict. Sometimes people look at this as it's me, if you're a parent, it's me versus the school, and the school might feel like it's the school versus the parent, but it really is a team process. And so we don't want to think of it as us and them, it's we, and how can we work towards solving this problem. So this graphic is just a reminder that it's the team working together to solve a problem, not two sides fighting it out. So we talk about some informal ways to resolve conflict, but there are also 3 dispute resolution processes that IDEA specifically requires. So we'll give a high-level overview of those as well. One thing that parents can do is to use an interest-based approach. And when we talk about positions and interests, the position is what you want to happen. It's kind of that surface statement of what your position is. And your interest is why you want it to happen. What's the reason you want that? What are you hoping to get from that? And it's helpful before you go into a meeting to think about, because sometimes we come in and say, I must have this. I must have a one-on-one paraprofessional. This is the only way it's going to work for my child. But if you step back and think, why do I want that? Why is this important to me? Maybe your answer is, I think that's the way that my child can be included in the general education classroom. So if you come at it with that in mind and presenting that, it kind of give the team, the team might have other ideas of how that can work. And it gives the team more to talk about and may open the door some options that you haven't thought about. So we like to recommend using an interest-based approach. Some tips for informal resolution. Gather information related to your concern. Make sure you have a complete picture. Often we hear one side of a situation, and as we know, everybody has a different perspective of a situation. So make sure you get a complete picture first. And then there are a lot of resources out there, one of which is Peak Parent Center. We have our parent advisors. I know I've mentioned these in the prior webinars, but we do have our parent advisors on staff. They are available for one-to-one assistance. So if you have a question, I'm experiencing this, is this right? Or just something you want to process and what issues does this bring up? Our parent centers are available for that. The Colorado Department of Education also has a parent line. And so if you have a question, you can call them. They may refer you back to your district, but just know that there are resources if you're uncertain and you want to get, it's almost like getting a second opinion. What do you think about this? Is this right? Because sometimes you might get information, the wrong information. It happens. We recommend usually begin by meeting informally with the lowest level person involved in the problem. That might be the teacher, the case manager, or the service provider. You may be in a situation where you might feel like the problem is with the lowest level person and you can't meet with them to talk about it. So maybe you'll want to talk to someone else. Then you could look at the building administrator, or maybe you need to talk to someone at the district level. So just kind of keep in mind trying to solve it at the lowest level first, if you can. And then again, you can request an IEP team meeting if you want the team to come together and try and resolve it. Some strategies. This process can become emotional, especially when you're involved in conflict. So think about your emotions and try and kind of work through them a little bit before you go into the meeting. Sometimes it helps to have a conversation with another parent. Maybe, you could again call Peak Parent Center, but think of ways to kind of work through your emotions. So when you come to the meeting, you're not coming in with all your emotions and you're ready to kind of think more strategically and think about how to reach the best results. Be polite, but direct, and try and explain the problem as concretely as possible and ask for help in solving it. We often think we have this, I find this all the time is I think what I'm saying is clear, but the person on their side doesn't have all this information that I have. And so they may have questions to understand it. So you explain as best you can, but invite questions too. So you make sure you're talking about the same thing. Ask for data or other objective materials that are relevant to the problem being addressed. If you're concerned about writing, you could ask for some writing samples or what are you seeing? If it's about, same thing about math or reading or whatever. If it's behavior, ask for information, kind of whatever they're talking about looks like. And we always want to keep the focus on what the child needs to make progress, because again, we have that FAPE continuum. Our goal is to make progress toward our annual goals and have that result in educational benefit and ultimately lead to further education, employment, and independent living. So keep the focus as much as possible on objective information. These processes can become emotional, they're hard on everyone. And so the more we can keep it on the objective situation, it can help us make the most progress. Now, I've mentioned this in a few of the resources in videos 1 and 2, but the Colorado Department of Education has an alternative dispute resolution project. The goal of the project is to provide a funded support system and toolbox of options for special education stakeholders in order to increase collaboration and improve relationships. We have seen conflict in special education increase over the years, and so states are looking at opportunities to resolve these conflicts earlier, because that helps our students get better outcomes, because we're not spending our time and energy and resources on the conflict, we're spending it on working toward their progress, toward their goals. And so I'll talk a little bit about this project. There are a few ways to engage with the ADR project. One is the idea of using facilitative skills in meetings by all IEP team members. And on the next slide, I'll kind of talk about what some of the things we mean by facilitative skills are. There are training and resources available through CDE and PEAK to help support families and professionals in developing facilitative skills. You can work with impartial facilitators from your district or neighboring district if they are available. Some districts have this available. There's a lot of people who've been trained, but you need to check with your special education director to see if that's an option in your district. You can also use an impartial CDE facilitator, and I'll talk more about that in the upcoming slide. I mentioned facilitative skills. So facilitative skills, we call them facilitative skills because these are skills the facilitators use when they're facilitating the meeting. But these are general skills that a lot of people can use. And we find that when all team members are using them, the meeting can go more smoothly. So some of those include active listening, using strategic questions, positions versus interests, which I mentioned, just recognizing sources of conflicts. A lot of times, other things underlie the conflict. It may be something related to the structure. It may be a communication issue. And so thinking about how to identify what's really causing the conflict sometimes can help us work through it. And then we talk about things that may cause resistance. And the facilitators themselves use charting in meetings when they're there, and they use visuals because we know that can help people understand. So if you want to find out more information, I'll have contact information, I believe, coming up. And again, there are trainings available to learn more about these and handouts as well. When you use an impartial facilitator offered by CDE, this is an optional service that's not required by IDEA. So next, I'll talk about the 3 dispute resolution process. Those are required by IDEA. So every state must offer those. Facilitation is a decision by the state to offer this service. It's voluntary, and when something's voluntary means they can't make you do it. So either party can request to have a facilitator come to their meeting, and both parties must agree. If one party says no, then they can't come support the meeting. A facilitator comes in just to support the meeting, and they're there to promote effective communication and participation, making sure that people get their turn, making sure that someone's not taking over the meeting and keeping people from sharing their views. It's a free service, and the goal of the facilitator is to work with the team to develop the IEP. Again, it's to kind of guide the team through the process, and they don't represent anyone on the team. If you're interested in requesting a facilitator for an IEP meeting, you can go to CDE's website. The easiest way for me to get there is to Google CDE ADR, and you'll get to this page. And they have a link, and you just fill out the form to request the facilitator, and they will take it from there and reach out and make sure they get the approvals or let you know that they can't go forward. This is a diagram from a presentation by Disability Law Colorado, and I like the way it lays it out. So I said, can we put this in our presentation? But it just kind of shows you very high level. The IEP facilitator, which I just mentioned, is the first level of dispute prevention. And then they lay out the three, which I'm going to talk about more. But you can have a mediation, which involves having a mediator assigned. You conduct a meeting called a mediation. If you are able to agree, then you'll sign an agreement. If you are unable to agree, it's an impasse, and then you might do one of the other things. This differs from the IEP facilitator, which works toward completing the IEP. You can also file a state complaint, and that's where you file a complaint, and they'll investigate, and then they'll issue a decision, and they'll give an order of what's going to happen, what corrective actions need to be done. And then there's finally due process, which is more like kind of like a trial. It's a hearing before an administrative law judge. Both sides present their case and they make a decision. So that gives you just a high level view. Again, these three are, the state must offer these. It's what IDEA requires. So mediation is also voluntary, which means both parties must agree. If they don't agree, you can't do it. It's done by a trained, impartial mediator. It's no cost to the parent or school. They must do it, they must have hold the mediation in a timely manner, so it can't be too long. And it has to be a convenient location. Again, if the parties come to agreement, you'll sign, it's like signing a contract. It'll be a legally binding written agreement, and the conversations are confidential. So if you later go on to another process, you can't bring out things from the mediation. The next one is the state complaint. This is a formal written complaint to the Colorado Department of Education. They do have forms on their website, so if this is something you want to do, you can look on there to see the form and what it looks like. It's for a violation of IDEA or ECEA, and if ECEA is the state law on special education, it has to have occurred not more than 1 year prior to filing. Proper filing of the complaint will initiate the investigation by state personnel. I say proper filing because you might file a complaint and they might say, this is not something that we can, it may not be an IDEA or ECA violation, so it might not be something that you can file a complaint on. So don't wait till that 1 year point, get that in earlier. So if there's an issue, you have a chance to fix it and then move forward. In general, this is best for those procedural parts, procedural and implementation problems. And again, the state can order compensatory services, teacher training, changes to policy, things like that. The due process hearing is and the state complaint, you file it, so it's not a voluntary process, you file it, and as long as it's properly filed, they'll move forward. A due process hearing is another thing you can file, and it happens. It's an administrative hearing conducted by an administrative law judge. It's a formal trial-like process, so you'll have witnesses and documentary exhibits, whatever, they'll look at all the evidence. This looks at violations of IDEA or ECEA concerning identification, evaluation, placement, or provision of FAPE within the prior 2 years. So you have a longer time frame. And this is more like looking at that substantive question. So when we talked about the two prongs, there was the procedural and the substantive. This is better for that. So it's looking at differences of opinion about whether the child is getting FAPE in the LRE. And if you remember, that's free appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. The judge can order compensatory services, reimbursement, future services, but they don't order money damages in this process. So these three processes are part of IDEA, and the idea is to give some quicker processes than using the court system because they know we're dealing with children's education. And so even though these processes can be long and time consuming, they're faster than the court system. So these are something that's specific to IDEA. Oh, a couple more points on the due process hearing. You may be required to have a resolution session before the due process meeting. If you file due process, they'll ask you to try and resolve it before you have the hearing. If parents file for the due process complaint, the parents have the burden of proof. That means that you have to prove the violation. If you don't like the decision, the decision can be appealed in state or federal court within 90 days of the decision. So just sometimes, a lot of times people say, well, how long do these take? So typically a mediation will be completed within 30 days of a mediation. A state complaint should have the decision within 60 days after the properly filed complaint. So once you're sure your complaint is proper, then it should be 60 days. The due process, it gets a little different. They must convene the resolution meeting within 15 days of the properly filed complaint, or they might determine that there's no point for a resolution meeting. So you may not have a resolution meeting, but that depends on the circumstances. If you do have a resolution meeting, that period can continue for up to 30 days. But if there's no resolution, then the hearing must be conducted and the decision issued within 45 days after that. So it's not a clear timeline from your filing of the complaint. The ALJ's decision can be appealed in state or federal court within 90 days of the date of the decision. And if you do file an appeal, that is sort of, it depends on the course, it might be settled, you might keep going. So that process of working through the courts could take months, it could take years. We talked in our first session about the Andrew F. case, and that went through, I can't even remember, I think maybe 7 years till it got to the Supreme Court. So that was a very long process. And in that case, the parents were paying for the student's school, and the issue was whether they could get money back from the school. So that can be a very long process. Outside of IDEA, if you remember, we talked about in our first session, IDEA is the special education law, but all our students with disabilities have rights under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the ADA. So if you believe their civil rights have been violated, you can work with the Office of Civil Rights and have an Office of Civil Rights complaint. That's outside of the IDEA procedures. If you want to learn more about that process, Disability Law Colorado is the state's protection and advocacy agency. Every state has one, and they help protect the rights of individuals with disabilities on the legal side. And then the Office of Civil Rights has a Denver office, so you can also contact them if you have concerns about a civil rights violation. Next, I'm going to talk about family advocacy and participation. I have a quote here from Corey Moore. I really like this quote. It's very old. It's from, from the early days of when students were starting to be involved, but it's still as relevant today as it was when she said it. She was like an early parent who was a strong advocate. And she says, we need to participate, not merely be involved. It is, after all, the parent who knew the child first and who knows the child best. Our relationship with our sons and daughters is personal and spans a lifetime. So for parents, IDEA will end when your child turns 21 or earlier if the circumstances are such, but they 21 is the end. So, parents are there from the beginning before they're determined eligible, and parents are there for the long haul after that. And so we do need to be involved and understand what's going on. Some reasons for the importance of family engagement. Children do better in school and schools get better. Children stay longer in school, and that's really our hope for them to stay through. Students are more motivated to do well. Families can gain an understanding of how schools work. Families can support schools and also hold them accountable. It helps change the lives of children and youth, not just your own. And then collaboration is what they call a high leverage practice. There's research on high leverage practices and special education. That when you get the slides, that's actually a link, and you can look if you want to learn more about high leverage practices. They talk about collaboration between families and schools, but also collaboration among school teams. I think as parents, sometimes we think our IEP team is they're talking together all the time, but a lot of times, you know, they're not meeting all the time unless they have a meeting that they need to attend, because everybody might be in different areas, and sometimes related service providers work in multiple schools. So the more we can work toward collaboration, it can really help everyone in a time when resources seem stretched. Our goals for advocacy are building productive and positive relationships with others, increasing the flow of two-way information, participating at all levels of decision making. We have a resource that we'll hand out, but sort of there are ways that you can get involved beyond your own student's IEP. There are committees. One of those is the State Special Education Advisory Committee. There are also local special education advisory committees. So if you want to be more involved beyond the scope of your own student, there are a lot of opportunities out there. And then, of course, we want to make sure that our students' needs are met, and it helps build community partnerships. And so many times you'll build relationships with people, and down the road, you'll meet them in some other capacity. So building those strong relationships for people who work in the field can have unexpected benefits that you don't even realize. So key points to remember: know IDA and how the IEP process works. And again, if you have questions, contact a peak parent advisor. Know what goals you have for your child. And when I say this, I don't just mean like know your measurable annual goals in the IEP. Really think about, you know, what goal do you have for your child in the end, and aim high. Sometimes the process doesn't make you aim high, but think about what's a good life for your student, what's a good life for your child, and how are you working toward that, and kind of bring that to your IEP meetings. Because for many of us, our kids have more needs than they can possibly, you know, we have more goals for them that they can possibly work on at any given moment. So sometimes step back from the IEP process and think about what's most important, and that can really help you when you're having discussions with your team. Write specific and measurable goals. I think it was in session 2, we talked about SMART goals. Stay in communication with the school. The IEP meeting is not your only chance to talk to the team. In fact, don't let that be the only chance that you talk with your team. So keep in touch. When your child is younger, you will probably have more extensive communications, but it can be just as important later on. So stay in communication. It is very helpful to communicate about communication. So find out from your teachers what the best way to communicate with them is, because they all have a different approach. I've had a teacher who gives everyone her cell phone number. I've had teachers who give no one their cell phone number. So it's very teacher specific. And then also let them know what works for you. So communicating about communication can help, because sometimes people get upset because someone's not responding in the way they would respond, or things like that. Use effective communication and advocacy strategies. This is so important, because the IEP meeting is like a business meeting. You are there trying to get the best result that's possible given the structures that you're working in. So the more you can communicate effectively and advocate for the goal or for what your interests are, you can often have a better result. If something isn't working, speak up. So you can talk to your team. You can call and ask for an IEP meeting, but don't just sit and be frustrated. Get support when you need it. That can be support from friends, families, respite. This is a long haul, but there are resources out there. And so talk to people, find out where the resources are. Use peak parent advisors to help you answer questions and get a better understanding. And focus on building and sustaining relationships. The IEP meeting is sort of a point in time, but the process of getting through school is a long one. We know our systems are, you know, stretched right now, and so focus on building and sustaining relationships and finding ways to get through as best we can. So here are some additional resources, and again, these are all links that you can use when you get the PowerPoint. These are general, related to the topics that I've mentioned today. I also want to highlight, I mentioned the ADR project, and so we have some specific ADR dispute prevention resources. You can find all those on the link that's there, but we also have some that I like to highlight. We do have common IEP and special education terms for Colorado. That's been translated into Spanish. And then we have one called Getting Started with Special Education for people who are just trying to figure out the process. That will be available in Spanish soon. It's not quite yet. And then the link to CDE's ADR project website. So you can get a lot of information from that. So that's a quick view of the process of implementation, dispute prevention, dispute resolution, and family advocacy. So again, this